everyone, this is your front-loading weekly video for Monday, October 19th. This is week 9. Let's get to it. Alright, so this video is going to go through some notes. I'm going to go through the assignments for the week and then do some reminders. So notes, that means get your notebook and something to write with. Pause this video, please, if you need to. Remember that when we take notes in this class, we write down everything that is underlined, okay? So your title today for your notes is English Notes, October 19th, 2020. So if you need to pause this video to get that written down, that's totally fine. Do that. All right. The notes that we're going to be covering today are about conflict. And we've already talked a little bit about conflict when we were learning about narrative structure last week. We started with the exposition, which is the setting and the main characters. Next comes the rising action, and that is where a lot of conflict and tension is introduced. So conflict are the problems or tension that moves the plot of a story. So basically, conflict, a synonym for conflict is problem. A story might have just one main conflict, or it might have many different conflicts. And we'll see with Part-Time Indian that there are several different conflicts that come up in the book. But the majority of them, or at least the main one, is going to be introduced in the rising action. So when we're thinking about conflict, we divide it up into at least 5 different categories of conflict. So our first one is man versus man. Then we have man versus self, man versus society, man versus nature, and man versus supernatural. Obviously, man here could be woman, child, person. This is an old school way of thinking about conflict, but it's still helpful when we're analyzing literature. So definitely sub out woman, child, whatever you need to for the man in this, okay? But we're going to be looking at these 5 different categories. So go ahead and take a second to write these down, 1 through 5, but leave a few blanks in between, blank lines in between these, each one of these, so that you can write their definition. So pause here if you need to. Okay, so the first one we're going to talk about is man versus man. This is the most simple, commonly used conflict in literature, movies, TV shows, everything. This is just 2 people who have a problem with each other. So whether that's arguing or fighting or causing each other problems, it could be a man and a woman in their relationship. It could be 2 rivals. It might be two people playing a sport, and their conflict comes up with each wanting to win. So, but basically, it's just very simple. One person is against another person, and they're either working to come to a solution, or they're working to win over another person or defeat another person. But this is a very simple, basic conflict that happens all the time. All right, so really quick though, if you need to pause to write this down, pause the video. All right, the next one is a very common conflict, and that's man versus self. So, basically, one person is dealing with mental, emotional, or physical problems that they are trying to overcome. Our most common man versus self conflict is when a person is trying to make a decision, okay? So they're conflicted inside their brain. Are they going to make the bad decision that would make them happy? Or are they going to make the good decision, which is harder? That's the very simplest form of man versus self. It can also be other sorts of emotional or mental problems, like depression, if that exists, would be a man versus self, or a person versus themselves. Maybe they have, I know a lot of my students, and myself included, experience symptoms of ADD or ADHD. That's when you're fighting with yourself to stay focused. That's man versus self. It might be an emotional problem. Maybe someone passed away and they're trying to get over the grief or sadness that they may be feeling. And lastly, man versus self can also be a physical problem that that a character is trying to overcome. So in our story, Part-Time Indian, our main character, who we will learn this week is named Junior, suffers a lot of physical problems that cause him a lot of problems. So man versus self can mean a few different things, but basically there's not another human character involved, but it's a person or a character who's struggling against themselves. So take a second to write this down. I also encourage you, if you want to draw pictures through this, that's totally fine too. Anything that will help you remember these categories of conflict. Okay, the next one is man versus society, and I think that this one is the trickiest for my students to sometimes understand. So again, it's not necessarily a man, it could be a person or a group of people, and they're fighting against a system or a community. So if we thinking about the most common thing in our society is experiencing right now is the institution or the system of racism, okay, or policing that is racist. So we have a person or a group of people who are fighting against this system. Also, poverty is usually caused by the way society or a community is structured. So poverty, if someone's really poor, it could be a person versus their poorness or their poverty. It could also be things like tradition. So maybe a person is fighting against their family's tradition of getting married young or having kids. That's a tradition. And maybe the character is going against those traditions. So this one is a little bit tricky, but just remember it's anything that the world, the society, or the community says is important or is a structure or system or something that's in place, and then a person is trying to break those rules that are created by the society. So pause it here if you need to write this down. All right, man versus nature. This one's pretty simple. You can see here I have a person versus a bear. That is a very obvious. There's a human who is facing the conflict or the problem of fighting a bear or surviving a bear attack. So a person or group of people are dealing with a natural disaster. So you could think hurricanes, tornadoes, fires, maybe earthquakes, things like that, or an animal villain. So maybe like a wild bear or living in the, if you're living in the woods or something and you're fighting snakes, that kind of thing. So man versus nature, anything that is natural to the world that causes people, not just men, people problems. Global warming could be a great man versus nature example. Man versus coronavirus is a good example of man versus nature because it's something that exists naturally on the earth. Write that down if you need to. Well, you do need to, but make sure that you have it written down and pause if you need to. All right, the last one that we're going to focus on is man versus supernatural. And so notice that natural is in the word here, but it's supernatural. So it's above and beyond what's natural to the earth, okay? So a person or group of people are dealing with a supernatural being or phenomenon. Think ghosts, monsters, aliens, that sort of situation, okay? I have a vampire here. So we see a lot of man versus supernatural around Halloween, especially monster movies, spooky movies, the undead, zombies. Those are all supernatural things because they don't exist actually on Earth. They're fantasy or they're science fiction, but they are still a common conflict that happens in stories, literature, novels, TVs, movies. You get the idea. So pause this and write this down. All right, so that's all your notes for this week. I'm going to go through the assignments for the week, and it will seem like a lot, but I'm going to break it down to you in the amount of time. It's really not a whole lot. So the first one is this weekly video and quiz. If you're watching this right now, you are most of the way through it. You just have to take the quiz afterwards. You know, I don't know how long this video is yet because I haven't published it, but I imagine it's less than 10 minutes. You also will have your part-time Indian Ed puzzle for this week. We're reading chapters 2 and 3. It's a little bit longer. It's quite a bit longer than last week, okay? This week's Ed puzzle is 22 minutes. So keep that in mind, okay? You need to work on time management and make time set aside 20 to 30 minutes to do your part-time Indian Edpuzzle. And then you have one smallish assignment that I'm going to explain in a second called Conflict in Movies. And it should really only take you 10 to 20 minutes. It's really not a lot of work. And then lastly, your weekly journal is, as I mentioned in class on Thursday and Friday, this should take you about 7 to 10 minutes. All in all, that means for an entire week of English assignments is less than an hour and a half. Okay, if we were in school, you would be doing 50 minutes a day. So this is about 1/4 of the amount of work that you would be doing if we were in the building. So I know you guys are overwhelmed and it seems like a lot, but you need to decide, okay, I'm going to do one of these assignments a day. And you should be fine. And they're all due by Sunday, okay? Except for the part-time Indian Edpuzzle is due before your second live class. So whether that's Thursday or Friday, depends on your class. And then the weekly video quiz is due before your first live class, okay? But these two things you do as you please, okay? Find some downtime and get them done. All right, so I'm going to explain the main assignment for the week. It doesn't actually have anything to do with part-time Indian, but we are going to still be looking at conflict. We're going to be looking at conflict in movies and TV shows. So the directions are to choose movies or TV shows that you know well. Then follow the directions below. Please read the example to make sure you're doing it right. So we're going to be looking at conflict, the five different categories. Wow, I can count, I promise you. The 5 different categories of conflict and where they're found in movies or TV shows, okay? So you're gonna copy and paste an image from a movie or TV show that represents the type of conflict that you will explain. So in the first column, this first box, it will be a picture. And then in the second one, you'll explain what happens in the movie or TV show and justify why it is an example of this specific type of conflict. So I'm going to show you an example. You will have access to this as well. This is on your copy. So I chose this picture from Pocahontas, where we have Pocahontas and her the man that she's supposed to marry, Cocoon. Okay, and I said this is an example of man versus society, because Pocahontas is struggling with whether to make her community, so she's the man or woman, and her community is society. So she's struggling with whether to make her community happy by marrying Cocoon or make herself happy by going with John Smith. You could also argue that maybe this is man versus self because she's conflicted with what decision to make. Other parts of the movie, you could also say Cocoon and John Smith are man versus man because they have conflicting interests and are at odds with each other in the new world. Okay, so you are going to choose whatever movie or TV shows, or you can use comics or anything you want, but you find a visual image of it and then do exactly what I said and use the 5 different conflicts. So man versus self, man versus society, man versus nature, or man versus supernatural, okay? So you should try to find an example of each one. You can use the same TV show or movie or whatever you're using for all 5, but that might be tricky to do. So if you can do that, amazing, but otherwise you could have 5 different movies or TV shows, or you could have 3 and 2, or 2, 2 and 1. It is entirely up to you. Don't work super hard on this. It should just be basically one copy and paste picture into the left-hand column and one sentence describing it. That's it. Please comment on this assignment, on the weekly video assignment, or on this assignment if you have any questions. I also really encourage you to come to class, to the live class sessions, because we do go over a lot of this stuff, and I tend to answer a lot of questions, common questions that many students have. All right, thanks again for watching, and I will see you in your live class.